Welcome to part 2 of Citizens Forum, February 12th. Our guest is Arthur Caldicott. Am I saying that right?
Caldicott.
Arthur Caldicott. And Arthur is sort of a member of a group called CoalWatch. And I think for a lot of people, you're going to be quite shocked to find out that a coal mine or coal mines are being planned on Vancouver Island, and the process is moving ahead. I have no idea what's going on, so what's the overview?
Well, the overview is there's a lot of coal on Vancouver Island, and it's been mined for a century now. Dunsmuir made himself very wealthy mining coal on Vancouver Island. He was given an awful lot of land in association with his mining enterprises and his profile in the business community to build a railroad. And a whole bunch of that coal was granted to him. He was given both surface rights and he was given underground mineral rights as well. And a large chunk, I think it's 29,000 hectares of the underground mineral rights, specifically in the Comox coal field, was granted to Dunsmuir, and that has since shifted through to Weldwood, a forest company, and West Fraser Timber, and West Fraser had no interest in developing its coal prospects, so it sold it all to a consortium of Compliance Energy, a stock exchange speculative mining company, and Itoshu and LG, two Asian conglomerates. So they are a joint venture.
So now, I think you said 29,000 hectares of underground coal
yeah,
is now owned by sort of a
it's owned by this
based corporation.
Asian-Canadian consortium.
Right, and they're planning to start to mine coal.
And they have started exploring in it, and the very south end of it.
And just tell us where it is.
Well, on the map, towards the south end of the mineral holdings, near Fanny Bay, south of Courtenay, north of Parksville, and Qualicum Beach.
So this is between Courtenay?
Between Courtenay and Parksville.
They are planning to open.
They're planning to develop 3,100 hectares of the 29,000 total as a mine called the Raven Underground Coal Project.
So
it'll be an underground mine. They'll go in at the surface about 5 kilometers west of the Buckley Bay Ferry Terminal to Denman Island. They'll be going in underground there and mining underground using mining machines, underground mining machines. So there aren't a lot of operators to these things, and they're big devices that just work through the coal seams, which are like layers of strawberry icing in a cake.
Now I have to say that if I hadn't heard of this project through yourself and some others, I would have no idea that the provincial government is on the verge of allowing the opening of, I guess, a fairly major coal mine on Vancouver Island. I mean, isn't it horrifying?
This one's been a long time in kind of the development process. And
we still know nothing about it.
Well, in Victoria, you may not know as much about it as you'd like to know, and it's great that you've got us on the show here to talk about it today. We have done some presentations here that haven't had much uptake. I think partly it's because it may be perceived as a local issue, local to the Mid-Island and not of specific
It's not perceived
interest
at all. It's been kept as secret. I mean, when you can keep a coal mine on Vancouver Island completely secret, and this is big, I assume. I mean, what do people think around Courtenay?
Well, many people have been doing their best not to keep it secret, including CoalWatch. For example, we're kind of jumping ahead in the discussion. I haven't even gotten to tell you what the mine proposal is yet. But to jump ahead, in the environmental assessment process, there are public comment periods, and this one mine has generated more public comments than any other project in the history of the Environmental Assessment Office of BC, which is quite a statement. I mean, people are aware of it. The more people we can get aware of it, the better it is, because the next public comment period is coming up, and that's an action item that I would like us to get to towards the end of our conversation today, if you can make sure that we don't forget that.
Give us a website again, just so people know where to go to for information.
Well, there's two websites, and we'll repeat this again as well. Two websites that people can Google and they'll get there automatically. One is CoalWatch.ca.
CoalWatch.ca.
The other is MineAction.ca.
MineAction.ca. Okay, so
So to get to the information about
yes.
this and the action items, they don't need to know anything else. CoalWatch.ca or MineAction.ca will get them there.
Okay.
So
What
to
are they
come back
proposing?
to, yeah, what are they proposing? Well, it's a relatively small to modest size underground coal mine. All the major coal mines in BC, there's maybe 10 operating coal mines. Most of them are in the East Kootenays, the Teck owned mines, huge open pit operations. They mine high grade metallurgical coal, and all of it is exported, mainly to Asia. There are some smaller mines, again all open pit, in the northeast of BC, and once again their coal is all used for steel making purposes and shipped off to Asia. This mine is will be one of 2 underground coal mines in BC. The second one is actually in Campbell River, the Quinsam project. You may be familiar with that name. It's an underground coal mine, and this one will be similar to that. Underground, so you don't see so much happening on the surface. The surface devastation is not anywhere near so conspicuous, but the underground devastation is every bit as
What does underground devastation mean?
underground devastation. Well, it's 3,100 hectares, and there are 2 seams underground that they want to mine with their coal mining machines. So they will dig in underground, and their machines will just move through the seams of coal, which in some places are no deeper than this table of yours, you know, like half a meter, and in other cases are maybe 3 meters deep.
You mean half a meter underground?
No, up to 600 meters underground, but very narrow seams in there that are fractured. So sometimes they just break off, and the mining machine has to drop way down here to continue through the seam. And there's 2 of these seams, so they'll be basically taking out a layer of coal under the entire 3,100, 2 layers of coal under the entire 3,100 hectares. So one of the concerns is what happens with subsidence. You know, when you take that much land out, it's solid rock, right? When you take it out, something's got to give. And it's just, you know, all of the Vancouver Island is seismically active. So that's one concern that we can mark up. Maybe we can talk about that a bit more later.
What is the environmental cost of having a coal mine?
Well, before we get to that, let me just back up to more about the mine. They're going to mine approximately 2 million tons of ore per year for 16 years, so 30 years of 30 million tons in total. Of that 30 million tons, approximately 13 million of it will be clean coal, quote unquote, processed, and all the extraneous stuff that isn't marketable will be taken out. That'll be shipped off to Port Alberni to be shipped by port to Asia. The remaining 17 million tons will sit behind as piles of waste, leaking sulfuric acid into the environment, leaching heavy metals out of the waste rock and the waste coal, and putting it into the watershed, the Cowie Creek and Sable River watershed.
So again, 17, who thinks of these things? 17 million tons of unused coal are going to be just piled up on top of the land, and they will be leaching.
Well, there's there are sulfides. There's sulfur in all of this rock that's being, or most of this rock, that
sulfuric acid, I think you said.
It creates an.
Now there is something that we never hear about called acid
mine drainage or acid rock drainage.
Acid mine drainage.
Yes.
I mean, I've heard that it's a massively huge, disastrous problem, but we never hear about it. I don't think anybody, including myself, knows what it is, but it sounds like that's exactly what this is.
That's exactly what it is. The sulfur forms sulfuric acid, and it itself is toxic in the environment, and it in turn leaches out metals that are like arsenic. For example, Quinsam, I just mentioned Quinsam. A study was done 2 years ago up there and found arsenic levels in Long Lake, which is right in the mine zone in Long Lake, that are approximately 30 times the guideline permissible limits in British Columbia.
So anyways, now we know why the media isn't giving this any coverage. I mean, why would the local media here in Victoria, because I know nothing about this. I don't know if I've ever heard or seen a story about it. I'm not 100% watching, but has anybody, have you, the people who are watching this show?
Today you are the story about it. That's good.
So But look at what's happening. It sounds like a massive disaster, and yet it's happening completely in secret. So, I mean, wow.
Well, let's jump a little bit around a little bit.
Okay.
Mining companies and governments themselves. You remember Christy Clark made a promise about, what, 8 months ago now, 6 months ago, that she was going to build, read my lips, 8 new mines by 2015. That was one of her promises. This was clearly one of the mines that she had in mind for that, because it's, you know, historically in BC, this would be a slam dunk for a mining company. The province supports mining coal, supports the jobs and the revenues that come with mining. But on the subject of revenues, I mentioned earlier that this coal is all owned by the mining company. That means, according to the company, that they are not subject to the mineral production tax that applies to other mining companies that are mining, you know, Crown-owned minerals. Because these guys own this coal freehold through the whole Dunsmuir, Esquimalt, and Nanaimo linkage, they're claiming they don't have to pay that tax. So on the revenue side, the big revenue plug to the government is the mining tax, right?
You know, we have to build a whole new economy where we stop destroying everything in order to supposedly get the money. I mean, it's totally crazy. The economy is
the other aspect is jobs. The company's claiming they'll employ 350 people directly in the whole mining operation. But as you know from news headlines about foreign guest workers in proposed coal mines in northeastern BC, there isn't a surplus of underground miners available in British Columbia. They're simply not here. So when this company is complaining or stating that it's going to employ locally wherever it can, it's an empty gesture, because the miners do not exist, not in the Comox Valley, not on Vancouver Island, and according to, you know, Canadian Dahua, the company proposing to import miners from China in northeastern BC, they're not available in Canada. And they've got some pretty good ammo to back them up. Now, the steel workers are strongly of the view that story lacks credibility.
Well, clearly, if you've got a mine that you're building and you want to actually staff it with people who live here, you start training them a year ago.
Well, if you're a miner trying to maximize your profit, you want to drive your costs down. And driving your costs down doesn't mean employing Canadians.
That's right.
Doesn't mean training Canadians.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so this whole project is, I mean, I can't believe we know nothing about it. So where do you want to go now? I think...
we know lots about it.
Okay. Up there, yeah. Did we cover the concerns?
Well, the big concerns are impacts on water. First, you have to address the benefits, you know, because the Environmental Assessment Office, and later when we're talking about what the government has to do to approve this mine or not approve this mine, they're going to look at kind of the environmental impacts or the socioeconomic impacts of the mine versus the benefits that the mine proposes to bring, jobs and revenues. Well, we've already kind of undermined the jobs and revenues statements of the company. They aren't going to happen. They'll be imported workers. They won't be workers from Comox Valley or from Vancouver Island. Absolutely certain of that. And the revenues aren't there according to the company either. So there's those two benefits gone that the government, in weighing the pros and the cons, will say there don't appear to be any pros here. The concerns are, in particular, the impacts on water, and that leaching of metals and acids downstream in the watershed go directly to Baines Sound. Baines Sound is the site of British Columbia's biggest shell fishery. It generates something like $30 million a year, employs 600 people in a sustainable, you know, multi-generational enterprise that can go on forever if we don't screw things up too badly. And putting that whole thing at risk by exposing, you know, this mining pollution to the surface and into the watershed is just untenable. So water, drinking water is another source, another concern. The dust, of course, land subsidence. These are all issues of concern. Port Alberni has its own set of concerns because they're proposing 3 or 4 trucks a day going in one direction to Port Alberni and coming back again. Three or four trucks an hour every day, 7 days.
3 or 4 trucks an hour?
An hour. you know,
Every
24
day.
hours a day, 7 days a week.
24 hours a day?
Yeah, 24 hours a day. It's about 80 kilometers over to Port Alberni, right down through the middle of town to the port, where they will stockpile the coal and then bring ships in every few days to load them up.
Okay, we've only got 3 minutes left. You said
that
something, yes, you said something about a comment period.
Yes, the environmental assessment. This project, up till now, although it's been well known in the Comox Valley since 2009, has not yet formally entered the application review process at the Environmental Assessment Office. That starts probably early April. And when that starts, there will be a 50-day public comment period, and we need absolutely to have people commenting en masse into that process. Saying don't build this mine won't have any impact at all on the environmental assessment process or the review findings itself, but the ministers after this, when they review the report from the Environmental Assessment Office, will weigh pros and cons, who's for it, who's against it.
So what are the two websites that people can go to for information?
CoalWatch.ca.
CoalWatch.ca.
MineAction.ca.
MineAction.ca.
Are we out of time? Can I
we
make
have
a
1
final
minute
comment?
left. When the NDP gets elected, what's their position?
The NDP does not have a position. As you know, they're playing it they're trying not to take positions on
And it
things.
sounds like then if they don't have a position, they're going to support it in the end.
Well, they would. You know, if the mining lobby is pushing hard enough, people need to push back. But if they can see that local governments have all passed resolutions now of concern about this mine, the Shellfish Growers Association all have expressed strong reservations about this mine. Comox First Nation, they're concerned about this mine, and if 3,000 or 5,000 people comment to the Environmental Assessment Office, they will see clearly that this is not a winner. And politicians in BC.
Arthur, we're out of time. Sorry. Thank you very much for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Folks, if there's nothing else you do this week, go to those two websites, CoalWatch.ca and...
Sign up now, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome back, folks, and this is going to be section 3 of our show today, and we decided to shake things up a little bit, and I'm going to be the interviewer for a change, and that's because my good friend Jack Etkin is writing a book, and surprise, surprise, the book is about democracy. So I'd like to ask Jack a few questions about, you know, how he came to the decision to write this book and just how things are going. So Jack, what brought you to the point where you decided to write a book about democracy?
Well, actually, it's funny because I was writing this started 12 years ago. I started to write a book about the national debt. Can you imagine a more boring subject? But as I was going through it and you began to see all the complete misinformation that I had about what the national debt story, I began to see that it was really a much bigger subject, and I came to realize that it's really about, the whole issue was really about democracy and media. And it was from that that I got this interest, and that's my thing now, is democracy and media. Those are the two issues that I keep pushing. Somebody asked me, I was at a party once, and somebody asked me, I told somebody I was writing a book, and they said, is it fiction or nonfiction? And I said, it's fiction. It's about democracy in Canada. So anyways, that's the joke the book starts out with. I hope somebody got it. Walter didn't. So, what is democracy, okay? So there's two definitions of democracy that I like. One is from the Greek words demos and kritia. Demos means the people, and kritia means to rule. So democracy actually means the people rule. And I think that's not a bad direction for us to be going in a general way. Right now the problem is, I think, the corporations rule. The politicians work for them, and the people, the citizens, are completely out of the picture. The corporations control all the political parties on almost all the issues almost all of the time, and they own all the media. So we, the people, are in a mess. So I like that definition of democracy, the people. And the other one I like is the famous one, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Right. I think if we moved in more in those directions, we'd be a lot better off.
Now, you know, in a democratic society, I mean, what's tied in with the concept of democracy is freedom, and the concepts of rights, that citizens have rights, and human rights and civil rights and such. But what are the components in a democracy that you think have to be functioning correctly in order for the society to function in a fair way?
Well, I think, I mean, I go by what the definitions are. I think if the people rule, then we would be in much better shape than we're in now. And what I mean is that the public should be well informed on the important issues of the day. And we should simply be asked, what do you want? And if there's a strong feeling one way or the other, then that is the direction in which our government should be doing its best to move things along. I would be happy to go along with that kind of a process where the public is well informed. Take the issue, for example, of genetically contaminated foods. Our whole food system has been filled now with genetically contaminated foods. They're not safe, but nobody cares. I mean, people care, but the government doesn't work for us, so they allow it, and the media is owned by the corporation, so they don't tell us about it. If we had the kind of process where I'd like, people would have been told decades ago that Monsanto Corporation and others are thinking of doing something to our foods, our basic foods that have never, ever, ever been done before. To put a gene from a fish into a tomato because it's somehow useful for them. And we would have been asked, do you want it? And there would have been studies to show if it's safe or not. None of that happened. They just put it in. And so that's the kind of, on all issues, big and small, I'd like to see that general formula followed, a well-informed public being asked what we want.
You know, you mentioned in an earlier program, and something I just heard on CBC this morning, and they're asking the people of Tunisia, who now are recently just trying to form a new democracy, what their definition of democracy was, and their largest concern was economic democracy, that they would have a chance to have an egalitarian society. And then they talked about the media and the fairness in the media, and number 3 was the right to go to the polls and vote. So as you can see, even with these people, they know that these are building blocks that all have to fit together in order to create this society that will function in a way that's fair and treats all the citizens equally. So basically, I know you've talked about the role of the media.
I'm just going to go back to those two things because I think
sure,
they're
go
important.
ahead.
I think that if we had a more democratic system in Canada, then we would have more economic democracy. In other words, I think we'd have, I mean, it used to be in Canada that it was more like this. The rich were here and the poor were here. But over the last 40 to 50 years, as this corporate power has grown, we've gone like this. And the rich are now have so much money they don't know what to do with it. And the poor are now living on the streets. I don't think we'd have that if we had. I think if we were more of a democracy, we'd be more like this. Because I think that's what most people would want. But unfortunately, what we want doesn't count for anything because we are not a democracy anymore, if we ever were, but we're certainly much less than we've ever been.
Yeah, you know, it always brings me to my concern is that how far have we gotten away from these basic principles? As young people, our young people, do they have a burning desire for democracy? Or are we going to be seeing a newly type shaped society in which the public do not have that underlying burning desire for fairness?
Well, you know, I hear the word democracy being mentioned more and more and more. I went along with you, I guess, I don't know how long ago it was, to the first meetings in Victoria, not meetings, but they were demonstrations outside of Occupy. And people were just speaking freely at the microphones. There were hundreds and hundreds of people there. And I remember very clearly the word democracy being used by a lot of people who were speaking at those events. The media later told us that the Occupy movement has no list of demands. But they never reported that the Occupy movement kept using the word democracy. The media is a big problem because it's essentially a corporate-owned propaganda machine. In a democracy, you've got to have a free press. If you don't have a free press, I don't think democracy can, never mind flourish, but even survive. And I think one thing that we Canadians have got to do is realize the importance of a free press and really start to push to build one. And the first step in that is to stop believing the media that we do have. They just can't be trusted. They don't work for us, they don't work on our behalf. And then we've got to start finding a way to be able to get the information that the media refuses to tell us. Like the interview we just did a few minutes ago on the coal mine going up around Courtenay, that should be a huge issue up and down this island, and instead it's like a complete secret. So, I mean, and then we have to move towards a more democratic political system. We need a better voting system. The voting system we have simply does not do the job that a voting system is supposed to do, which is to fairly translate our votes into seats in our parliaments. Somebody there was an interesting comment. We don't elect prime ministers and we don't elect governments. We elect parliaments. And unfortunately in our system, Parliament has completely lost its power, and the party leaders, Christy Clark here in British Columbia, Stephen Harper for Canada, have now taken literally all the power of the government into their own hands. This is the exact antithesis of democracy. I think there's been a big push in the last few months from here and there in the grassroots. The words democracy keep getting stronger and stronger,
right,
but the media will not say it. And instead, look what they're giving us right now. As this is being filmed, the big story in the media is this Senator Brazeau, I think his name is being kicked out of the Senate because, you know, of some bad things he did or whatever. But why do they focus on that? Because that's what they want us to think about and to know about. Why won't the media start filling us with these stories about real democracy, real change? That's what we need to hear from our media, but we have to remember they don't work for us.
You know, one of the ideas that came out of a lot of the movements in the last few years, including the Idle No More movement also, is the idea of better, more representative government and the idea of a citizens' assembly. So what could you tell us about how a citizens' assembly would work?
I think a citizens' assembly would be a great way to move from where we are right now into a position much closer to real democracy. A citizens' assembly is simply a group of people that's pulled together. It needs funding and it needs something like that, so somehow the politicians would have to be involved, but they have to be kept away from controlling it as much as possible. Let's say a couple of hundred people are picked to be the Citizens' Assembly in British Columbia, or you could have two or three smaller ones of 70 people each. It would be exactly or very similar to what happened when we had a Citizens' Assembly on electoral reform. And that worked very well. This one could work even better if the rules governing it were made better. And the Citizens' Assembly would look at how can we improve our democracy here in British Columbia. And what an educational process that would be for all of us. And if they came up with some great ideas, which I really think they would, because the ideas are all out there, you know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, we could vote on them. And how about something like, let's have a Auditor General overseeing the political parties to make sure that the political parties themselves operate fairly and honestly and democratically. Because right now the political parties are largely self-regulating, and I think we know very well that that don't work. It doesn't work. Another thing is, should the Premier be the one to choose the cabinet? Imagine if the caucus of that party or the entire legislature or parliament were the ones who chose the cabinet. Then the cabinet would be responsible to the people we elect, instead of being responsible to the person at the top, the Premier or the Prime Minister, who unfortunately very often doesn't work for us. They work for corporate forces far different than us.
The one thing that you could see, you know, we've been talking about smart meters so much, and the $1 billion is being spent there, and And it seems like $1 billion is spent here and there by the provincial government. They don't seem to bat an eye, but they never have asked the public. They've never gone to the public and asked them, do you want us to spend money in this area? And something that I've always been interested in is the use of referendums to answer big questions like that. For instance, like the decision on the HST. So how do you think the concept of referendums fits well into a more democratic process?
Yes, you've got to have referendums and initiatives. Referendums are sort of set by the government. Initiatives come from the people. And the people have to be able to trigger initiatives to force the government to do something it won't do, or stop the government from doing something that the citizens don't want. Obviously, you need a good process. They exist in a lot of countries and even in a lot of American states. We don't hear much about them, but for example, just most recently in Washington state, there was a referendum on legalizing marijuana. I'm not sure what the wording was, but it passed. And now the government, for better or for worse, has to do what the people want. We need a lot more of that. We've got to be able to overrule the politicians. If the I read what I think is one of the best sayings ever about democracy. The saying was that the only safe place for democracy is in the hands of the people. When we put democracy in the hands of the politicians, we are finished. Look what the whole John Doyle thing that you mentioned last week. For the politicians, the government, to be able to pick the Auditor General is absolutely crazy. They're the last people who should be able to pick the Auditor General. And the politicians should have no say whatsoever in our voting system. We should have the voting system that we want. And I think a lot of people still want change, but the government will not talk about it. The NDP will not talk about it. The media will not talk about it. And we are saddled with a voting system that is the easiest system in the world for the corporations and their media to control. That's why they won't let us change it, because a proportional system is simply much more difficult for them to control.
Well, you know, when you were getting down to that, where we're looking at these mechanisms that you can have in the parliament or in the legislature to make things fairer. And as you say, the Auditor General, the office has been so politicized in the last few years, it makes it almost impossible for him to do his job. But in the end, when we have this party politics that we're seeing right now, and there seems to be more loyalty to the parties, for instance, than there are to the overall society. That you'll have a party that's like in the federal example is the Conservatives with Stephen Harper, that's hell bent on developing the tar sands, and really his party is he himself and his party have only garnered around 25% of the eligible voters of Canada. Almost half the voters stayed away from the polls.
Yeah, he's the Prime Minister only because the media supports him. I mean, if he didn't have the full support of the media, he'd be gone tomorrow. And we should get rid of him. We should have a coalition. It's just Canada has fallen behind in democracy, we've fallen behind in media, and because of that, we're falling behind in so many important issues.
Well, Jack, we're just about going to wrap it up, but, a few years ago, the Campbell government did allow that the Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform, and they came forward with recommendations. Whatever happened to all that?
Well, in the first vote, people supported proportional representation by 57% to 43%. 57% always wins in a referendum, but here in British Columbia, 57% lost and 43% won because the politicians didn't want change. There's two of our local MLAs, not local, but provincial MLAs, Bob Simpson and Vicky Huntington, have recently come out with a kind of paper on how to improve democracy in British Columbia. They've put forward some very good ideas. There's been nothing in the media about it that I've really seen, but it is percolating up. All of us keep pushing for democracy. I don't think there's anything more important than we can do. Democracy and a free press.
Well, nobody could agree with you more than myself. So that's going to wrap up this segment of Citizen Forum. I'd like to thank Jack for sharing his ideas on his new book, and hopefully he'll have success with that. And I want to thank everybody for watching the program, and we'll be seeing you next week.